Let's cut to the chase. You're either going to let criticism crush you or you're going to use it to build yourself stronger. There's no middle ground. Everyone has an opinion, and if you haven't noticed yet, people are going to give you feedback whether you ask for it or not. The real question is, are you mature enough to handle it like a pro, or are you still playing defense like an amateur? Here's the reality: if you can't handle criticism, you will never reach your full potential. Period. Every successful person you admire, athletes, leaders, entrepreneurs, they all have one thing in common. They've mastered the art of handling feedback without falling apart. Immature people get defensive, argue, or sulk. Pros, they take notes, adjust, and get better. That's the difference. So, if you're tired of getting stuck in the same cycles, resenting people, holding grudges, or pretending you don't care when you really do, then it's time to grow up and handle criticism the way high performers do. When someone criticizes you, the very first reaction people have is to take it personally. It feels like an attack on who you are, on your worth, on your value as a human being. And that's where the real problem begins. Because once your ego jumps in, you stop hearing the message and start defending your identity. You think someone is calling you less than, when in reality, most of the time, they're just pointing out something you did or something you can do better. The ability to detach your ego from feedback is the dividing line between those who grow and those who stay stuck. It's the difference between professionals who are constantly improving and amateurs who waste all their energy defending themselves. The truth is, criticism stings because it bruises our pride. That little voice in your head says, "Who do they think they are to say that about me? They don't know how hard I work. They don't know what I've been through." And maybe they don't. Maybe they delivered the criticism clumsily. Maybe their tone was off. Maybe they even exaggerated the problem. But none of that changes the fact that your growth is not determined by how sweetly feedback is packaged. It's determined by how you handle it. If your self-worth is so fragile that one piece of criticism makes you crumble or lash out, then you're basically putting your development in someone else's hands. You're saying, "I'll grow only if people are kind enough to give me feedback in the perfect tone." That's not realistic, and it's not the path to success. Here's the shift you've got to make. Criticism is about behavior, not your identity. Someone saying you didn't follow through on that project is not the same thing as them saying you're worthless, but your ego will try to twist it into that. Your ego wants you to hear, "You're a failure, you're not good enough, you'll never get it right." That's a lie. Feedback is just data, it's information. It's a chance to see blind spots that you would never notice on your own. And if you can learn to step back and say, "Okay, this is about what I did, not about who I am," you take the sting out of it, you free yourself from feeling attacked, and instead see the feedback for what it really is, a tool for growth. Detaching your ego doesn't mean you ignore your feelings. Nobody enjoys being criticized. It's uncomfortable, and it may even hurt for a minute. But maturity means you feel the sting and still choose to look at the content. You allow the emotion to pass without letting it hijack your response. That's emotional control. And it's one of the strongest indicators of success. Because think about it, if you're the kind of person who shuts down or blows up every time someone calls you out, how many opportunities are you going to miss? People will stop giving you feedback. They'll avoid being honest with you. And you'll stay stuck in the same patterns, wondering why nothing changes. Now, here's the hard truth. If 3 or 4 people keep giving you the same piece of feedback, your ego is the only thing stopping you from accepting that they might be right. You can dismiss one person as being wrong. You can brush off 2 people as just not getting it, but when you start hearing the same thing over and over, you interrupt too much, you don't follow through, you're hard to approach when there's a problem. Guess what? That's not a coincidence, that's reality. And if your ego is too inflated to face it, you'll never fix it. Professionals welcome that kind of feedback because they know it's a roadmap to improvement. Amateurs plug their ears and pretend everything's fine. Which side do you want to be on? One practical way to detach your ego is to literally separate your identity from your behavior and your mind. Say to yourself, "I am not my mistakes, I am not my habits, I am not my performance, I am the person who chooses whether to change those things or not." That gives you breathing room. It allows you to treat feedback as a snapshot of a moment, not a life sentence. Someone says, "You came across harsh in that meeting," and instead of spiraling into shame or anger, you can say, "Okay, maybe I did in that moment. That doesn't define me. It just means I need to be more aware next time." That's maturity, that's professionalism. Look, your ego will always want to protect you, and that instinct isn't going away. But you can choose not to let it drive the car. Every time you face criticism, you've got a fork in the road. Either you protect your pride or you pursue your growth, but you can't do both at the same time. Pride says, defend yourself, explain yourself, prove them wrong. Growth says, listen, learn, adjust. And if you can consistently choose growth, even when your ego is screaming at you to fight back, you'll be unstoppable. At the end of the day, Criticism isn't the enemy, ego is. The minute you stop treating feedback as an attack and start seeing it as input, you step into a new level of power. You're no longer a prisoner of other people's words. You get to decide what you take, what you leave, and how you use it. That's freedom, and that's what makes you a pro. When it comes to criticism, one of the biggest mistakes people make is treating all feedback as equally valid. That's a fast track to frustration because let's be real, some criticism is pure garbage. It's coming from someone's insecurity, their jealousy, or their own bad day. But here's the trap. If you throw all criticism into the trash just because some of it is junk, you end up losing the gold too. You lose the nuggets of truth that could actually sharpen you. Handling criticism like a pro means knowing how to separate the noise from the signal, how to filter the feedback so you keep what matters and discard what doesn't without losing your composure. The first step is to accept that not every person who criticizes you has your best interest in mind. Some people criticize because they want to tear you down, not build you up. Some people criticize because they're projecting their own failures onto you. And yes, some people criticize because they're jealous that you're doing what they don't have the courage to do. That's reality. But here's the other side. Some people criticize because they see potential in you and they care enough to say something. Some criticize because they've been where you are, and they know what it takes to go further. And some criticize because whether you like the way they said it or not, they're pointing out a weakness that's holding you back. If you're too defensive to recognize that, you'll miss the very feedback that could change the game for you. So how do you filter the gold from the garbage? You look at three things: who it's coming from, what it's pointing to, and whether there's a pattern. Who it's coming from matters, because let's be honest, you don't take investment advice from someone who's broke, and you don't take fitness advice from someone who's never worked out. If the criticism is coming from someone who's walked the path you're trying to walk, who has some credibility or skin in the game, that feedback deserves your attention. On the other hand, if it's coming from some random internet troll who doesn't know you and never will, why would you let that weigh more than the words of someone who actually cares? Pros evaluate the source before they decide how much weight to give the words. Next, look at what it's pointing to. Even if the person isn't credible or even kind, sometimes they accidentally stumble on the truth. Maybe they said it in the worst possible way, sarcastic, bitter, or dismissive, but buried in there was something you needed to hear. For example, if someone says, "You always mess things up," that's not constructive, that's emotional venting. But if you stop and ask yourself, okay, is there a situation recently where I did drop the ball? You might uncover an area to improve. The delivery may be garbage, but the content might still contain gold. It's your job to mine for it instead of throwing the whole thing out because your feelings got hurt. The third filter is patterns. One person's opinion is just that, an opinion. But when multiple people, independent of each other, keep pointing to the same flaw, you'd be a fool to ignore it. That's not noise, that's a mirror. If your boss, your spouse, and your best friend all say you're bad at listening, guess what? You're bad at listening. If 2 or 3 people tell you you've got a habit of being late, that's not a coincidence. That's feedback worth taking seriously. Patterns don't lie. They reveal blind spots you can't afford to keep pretending don't exist. Now here's where people get stuck. They either absorb everything like a sponge or block everything like a wall. Neither works. If you absorb everything, you'll constantly doubt yourself, second guess your decisions, and live at the mercy of other people's opinions. If you block everything, you'll stagnate because you'll never let yourself be challenged or corrected. The professional mindset is to treat criticism like a buffet. You don't eat everything on the table. You pick what nourishes you and leave the rest behind. You don't get upset because there's food you don't like. You just don't put it on your plate. That's how you approach feedback. Another key to filtering is checking your emotional reaction. If feedback makes you defensive, there's usually a reason. Sometimes it's because the feedback is garbage, yes, but more often it's because it hit close to home. That sting you feel is often a sign that there's some truth there you don't want to face. The more it bothers you, the more you need to ask yourself, why is this getting under my skin? If the answer is that it's flat out false, toss it. But if the answer is that you secretly know it's true, then congratulations, you just found gold, whether you like it or not. The real discipline is to train yourself not to react in the moment. When criticism comes in, your emotions flare up and your pride wants to jump in. But if you can pause, sit with it, and process later, you'll be much better at filtering. You'll realize some comments don't deserve another second of your time, while others point to a shift you need to make. That's where growth happens, in the quiet space after the sting, when you decide what to keep and what to throw away. At the end of the day, filtering criticism isn't about being picky, it's about being smart. If you throw out every piece of feedback, you stunt your own growth. If you swallow every piece of feedback, you drown in other people's opinions. The pros don't do either. They mine the gold, leave the garbage, and move forward sharper than before. That's how you turn criticism from an obstacle into an advantage. When criticism hits, most people's instinct is to react, not respond. They snap back, get defensive, roll their eyes, or shut down. That's a reaction, automatic, emotional, unfiltered. And here's the problem with reactions. Once they're out, you can't take them back. Words said in a defensive moment can burn bridges you actually need. Rolling your eyes at your boss might feel good for 2 seconds, but it could cost you trust for months. Snapping at your spouse might let you vent your frustration, but it chips away at the respect in your relationship. Reacting is about protecting your ego in the moment. Responding is about protecting your future. And that's the difference between amateurs and pros. Responding instead of reacting means you take a pause. You give yourself a beat between stimulus and response. It sounds simple, but it takes discipline. Your body might heat up, your pride might scream. Say something back. But if you can pause, even for 3 seconds, you take control of the moment. That pause is power. It gives you the chance to choose your words instead of vomiting emotions. It lets you decide whether to clarify, thank, or even challenge respectfully. It's the difference between escalating the situation and elevating it. Think about it like this: a reaction is reflex, a response is strategy. When someone criticizes you, the reflex is to argue or justify, but a strategic response might be to ask, "Can you give me an example?" Or, "Thanks for pointing that out, I'll think on it." One approach fuels conflict, the other builds credibility. People notice when you can stay calm under pressure. They respect it. They may not always agree with you, but they'll trust you more because you showed composure. That's influence. Now let's be clear. Responding doesn't mean you have to accept every piece of criticism as gospel. It doesn't mean you're weak or submissive. It means you're strong enough not to let your emotions hijack the situation. For example, if someone says, "You're terrible at this project," reacting might sound like, "You know what you're talking about? I worked my butt off." That just throws fuel on the fire. A response might be, "That's a strong statement. Can you tell me specifically where you think I went wrong?" See the difference. One makes you look insecure. The other makes you look in control. The truth is, people test you with their words. Sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's not, but they're watching to see how you handle it. If you fly off the handle, they know you're easy to rattle. If you freeze up, they know they can bulldoze you. But if you respond calmly with curiosity and composure, you gain respect even from your critics. In fact, sometimes the way you handle criticism can win people over more than your actual performance. Because performance can fluctuate, but character shows up in every interaction. Responding instead of reacting also helps you process what's worth keeping. When you react, you're too busy defending yourself to actually hear the feedback. You miss the point. But when you respond thoughtfully, you can separate the tone from the truth. Maybe they said it harshly, maybe they exaggerated, but if you respond calmly, you can filter out the junk and keep the lesson. It's like sifting through sand to find the diamond. You won't find it if you're just flailing around in anger. One of the best tricks to shift from reaction to response is to literally buy yourself time. Phrases like, "That's interesting, let me think about that," or "I appreciate you pointing it out," create a buffer. You don't have to agree or disagree in that moment. You just buy time to process. Later, in a calmer state, you can decide whether the feedback is useful. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. Because here's the deal. Not every battle is worth fighting in the moment. Sometimes the smartest move is to walk away with the information and come back stronger later. Here's a harsh truth. If you're known as someone who can't take criticism without blowing up, people will stop giving it to you. And that's not a win, that's a loss. Because feedback is free coaching. It's someone showing you a blind spot that you might never see otherwise. If people stop giving you feedback because they're afraid of your reactions, you cut off one of the biggest sources of growth you'll ever have. But if you respond instead of reacting, people trust you with the truth. And that is priceless. It's also worth pointing out that responding doesn't just benefit you, it benefits your relationships. People feel safer being honest with someone who won't explode or shut down. Whether it's your team, your friends, or your family, they'll be more open with you if they know you'll handle criticism with maturity. And the more honest feedback you get, the more opportunities you have to improve. It becomes a positive cycle. At the end of the day, reacting is about ego, responding is about growth. Reacting protects your pride for the moment, but costs you in the long run. Responding might bruise your pride for a second, but it builds your credibility, your character, and your future. So the next time someone throws criticism your way, remember this: you don't have to take the bait, you don't have to react. Take a breath, take control, and respond like the pro you're becoming. That's how you turn criticism into a stepping stone instead of a stumbling block. Criticism, when you strip it down, is really just energy. And energy can either drain you or drive you, depending on what you do with it. Most people treat criticism as poison. They take it personally, let it drag them down, and replay it in their head until they feel smaller. Pros treat criticism as fuel. They take that same energy, redirect it, and use it to get sharper, stronger, and more focused. The same words that crush one person can be the spark that ignites another. The difference isn't in the criticism itself, it's in how you process it. Turning feedback into fuel starts with a mindset shift. You've got to see criticism as something that's happening for you, not to you. If someone points out a flaw, you don't have to collapse into shame. You can say, great, now I know what to work on. If someone says you didn't deliver at the level you should have, you don't wallow, you double down and prove them wrong by raising your performance. That's not about being stubborn, it's about being driven. Every successful person has stories of someone doubting them, criticizing them, or telling them they weren't good enough. And instead of letting that bury them, they turned it into firepower. They let the criticism push them to go further than they ever would have without it. But here's the key. You don't just use criticism to spite people. That only gets you so far. If you're only motivated to prove someone wrong, once they're out of the picture, your fire goes out. The smarter move is to use feedback as fuel for self-mastery. It's not about showing them, it's about showing yourself. When you take criticism and use it to refine your skills, sharpen your habits, and raise your standards, you build a foundation of growth that doesn't depend on anyone else. You stop being reactive and start being proactive. That's when you truly own the process. Think of feedback like weights in the gym. If you avoid it because it's uncomfortable, you stay weak. If you engage with it, push against it, and work with it, you get stronger. The soreness is part of the process. And just like lifting, the heavier the weight, the more strength you build over time. Some feedback will feel light, you'll hear it, adjust, move on. Other feedback will feel heavy, it'll sting, it'll hit a nerve, it'll make you question yourself. That's the exact feedback that has the most potential to transform you if you're willing to carry it. Weak people drop the weight, strong people push through it until it builds them up. Another part of turning feedback into fuel is getting specific. It's not enough to just say, okay, I'll do better. You've got to take the criticism, break it down, and turn it into a clear action plan. If someone tells you that you lack confidence in presentations, don't just sulk about it. Sign up for a speaking class, practice in front of a mirror, or ask a mentor for tips. If your boss says you need to be more detail-oriented, don't stew. Start double checking your work, create checklists, and show improvement. Feedback without follow-through is wasted energy. Feedback with action becomes transformation. Now, you've also got to recognize that fuel burns. And the way you burn criticism can either power you forward or burn you out. If you obsess over every piece of feedback, you'll end up anxious, overthinking, and paralyzed. That's like pouring all the fuel into one tiny flame. You'll get an explosion, but it won't be productive. The smarter play is controlled fire. Use the feedback in doses. Take what's useful, set a goal, and channel the energy into improvement one step at a time. That way, criticism becomes a steady source of momentum instead of a mental overload. One of the most powerful ways to reframe criticism into fuel is gratitude. I know that sounds odd, but think about it. When someone criticizes you, they've given you a free X-ray into how others see you. They've exposed something you might not have noticed. You don't have to like the delivery, but you can still be grateful for the data. When you see feedback as free coaching instead of a personal attack, you stop dreading it and start looking for it. Imagine being the kind of person who welcomes feedback because you know it's the fastest way to grow. That's how champions think. And let's not ignore the emotional side. Criticism hurts sometimes, even when you know it's useful. But instead of letting that hurt shrink you, you can let it sharpen your hunger. Think about athletes who get cut from teams, told they're not good enough, or booed by crowds. The ones who make it to the top are the ones who take that pain and let it drive them to work harder. They don't deny the sting, they channel it. Pain becomes passion. Criticism becomes commitment. At the end of the day, feedback is just raw material. In the wrong hands, it rots into resentment. In the right hands, it becomes fuel for greatness. The choice is yours. You can complain about how unfair, how harsh, how uncomfortable criticism feels. Or you can decide to take that same criticism, run it through your filter, and turn it into energy that propels you forward. That's what pros do. They don't fear feedback, they feed on it. And if you can train yourself to turn criticism into fuel, there's no limit to how far you can go.